Welcome, folks. My name is Jean Bell. I'm a program host here at Nonprofit Quarterly. We're so glad you're joining us. This is a large public session about a really important topic. So I'm going to get started knowing that people are kind of coming from their last meeting and chiming in. And I'm so excited to have Curt and Shétu here from Diverge Finance Cooperative, and also to have Intuit QuickBooks here. We're actually going to have a demo at the back end of this session. And it's through Intuit QuickBooks that we're able to bring you this really exceptional content on a complimentary basis. So we're so grateful to them for that. We're here today to talk about the kind of incredible instability that organizations and fields are facing, right, in 2026 for a whole host of reasons, and really talk about what it means to have financial clarity even in that context, right, from a reporting perspective, from a staffing perspective, from a strategy perspective. Next slide, please. I think some of you know Curt, Klotz, and Shétu. They're co-founders and CEO and Chief Learning Officer, respectively, of Diverge Finance Cooperative, which is an accounting and nonprofit financial leadership firm. They work with nonprofits all over the country, both producing financials and also supporting leadership, fractional leadership, et cetera. Curt wrote one of the most read Nonprofit Quarterly articles ever, I think, and I think it still gets a lot of activity. Anya would have to tell us, but the graphic revisioning of nonprofit overhead, which was written, I think, in 2019, maybe, is still such an important contribution to our reframe of how we think about functional expenses and infrastructure costs in nonprofits. So welcome to you both. What I'd like to do is run a quick poll, and I will run it myself. And this is just to kind of get you in the room and thinking about where you are financially relative to this chaotic context. So it's a poll about kind of what you're expecting in the upcoming fiscal year, right? We know in nonprofits that even when revenue's at risk, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to shrink right away. We may have continuing commitments, or maybe you're growing in the face of the need in your community. So as you look to the next fiscal year, whether that's July or September or January, do you think you'll be adopting a budget that has less revenue assumption, about the same revenue assumption, or more revenue assumption? Or maybe here in June, you can't even say. We've got a lot of folks here, so I'm going to give you another 10 seconds to answer that, and this will just ground us in what's going on for this group. All right, so we have just about half the group expecting less revenue in this upcoming fiscal year, a third at the same, and only 10% expecting growth in revenue. So that's pretty consistent with why we're having this conversation and the kinds of pressures that we're all feeling and anticipating. I know a lot of groups are even anticipating cliffs, in 1 and 2 years out. So we're so glad to have you here, Curt and Shétu, and I'm going to turn it over to you to start walking us through these pressures and ways of thinking about them.
Thanks, Jean. Yeah, Shétu and I are co-founders here at Diverge Finance Cooperative, a cooperative that we formed just 5 years ago. We had our anniversary in May. We're very excited about that. And we're going to, hearing the results of that poll, just so you know, we are coming in to give our best take on what we think are places to pay attention to finance and how to shore up finance. What we unfortunately don't have is any kind of magic solution to some of the funding stresses you are all experiencing, but we'll get to that in a moment. But just want to say thank you for sharing that information, and not surprising to us given the time. So in the way that we are talking about this, and the way that we'll spend our time with you today, is to think of financial pressure points. So if you think of the same way that we think of, whoops, excuse me, hit that too soon, that we think of, caring for our bodies, that there are common sources of nonprofit financial stress. And as we encounter those, we don't have magic solutions, like I said, to any of these, but we do have some ideas about how we can become aware of those stress points and then how to address them. Shétu, I don't know if you would like to say a thing or two here as we get started.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Kurt. And I'm so happy to be here with you guys. Yeah, and I'm sure organizations, as Kurt said, you guys are facing their different long list of pressures financial pressures you might be feeling. But at this time, basically, the goal here is really to help you identify. And Kurt, you want to go to the next slide? Identify the different stress points, right? And then figure out how you can apply pressure to the right spot at the right time. And so I'm sure if we sit together, we can come up with a long list of financial pressure points you are experiencing. But today we're only going to focus on 5, right? And these 5 are the first one, cash reserves, basically how your money sustain your mission. The first is restricted revenue, how we can help you, give you tips of helping you craft helpful restrictions. And then accounting system design, the art of rows and columns, basically how your accounting system can really help you relieve the financial pressures you're experiencing. Also going to go through business model reality check, and then how you build a really strong finance team. So these are just 5. I'm sure you must be experiencing more than this, but we'll give you our best shot based on our experience and what we see is happening across. So the first one we're going to delve into is cash reserves. And next slide, Kurt. And we've all heard this the slogan or the phrase "cash is king," and this is really true for our personal lives and for any institution. And so, having adequate cash reserves on hand and or access to line of credit really will relieve any financial challenges an organization is facing. Next slide. And so the question then becomes, how much cash is enough, right? How much cash reserve should a nonprofit have on hand? And we've all heard the very quick answers that we've been given before: 3 months of budget expenses. All nonprofits should have 6 months of average monthly cash outlays. But I can just give you one example here. If you're an organization that receive 80 to 90% of your revenue, or if you're of cash coming through your organization at the end of the fiscal year, then none of these apply. So the question is, how much cash is enough? So you have to really go through a really thoughtful process. And we have 2 approaches of actually identifying that. The first one is really setting goals, setting a cash reserve goals based on your organization's receivable cycle. The next is setting a a reserve goal based on your emergency operation cycles. So we're going to go through each goal. Next slide, and we'll start with the receivable cycles. So as you can see, this is just an example we have here from an organization. They've decided that their reserve goal is 44,600. How did they get there? And there's a few analysis you have to do. The first is really figure out how regular and predictable are each of your revenue types. And number 2, what lead time? How long does it take you to respond or to recover any drops in revenue that you might be experiencing? And then how is each item weighted based on the total amount of your revenue that you have? So just a quick example, I'll just go through each of the columns here. You can see the first column is showing you the different types of revenues this organization actually have, their annual budget. And then they've actually thoughtfully gone through each line and figure out how often revenue flows through the organization from each of these lines. And then with that, you then decide, how much reserve do I need, right? And you can see they've then applied a weighting to it. The higher the amount, the higher the weight, right? And then the reserve, and then with that gets you your reserve goal. So with this example here for the receivable cycles, they've come up with this amount. And obviously it's just encouraging you to be very thoughtful. There's no one size fit all when it comes to calculating your cash reserve. You have to really go through the details.
Yeah, and Shétu, I'll jump in here and just so you know, as viewers, we realize we're violating every principle of PowerPoint design for a webinar by having a very dense slide here. And Shétu and I talked about this, and we just realized that all we'll do is offer an apology that we really intend these. We know there's going to be a PDF of the slide deck that will come out to you after this. And we expect that you will have many questions, and we're trying to actually give you information that's at enough detail that you can actually use it later. So that's our disclaimer.
It was very intentional. We couldn't cut it anymore, but we know that this is going to be for you at the end. So we're really going to invite you to just stay with us as we go through this. The next approach is actually using an emergency operating budget, right? So we all know that once you're in an emergency mode, it's the way you spend when you're in emergency is quite different. We've had a first run with that with COVID. We all know what an emergency budget looks like. And so with this organization, they've decided, or they've arrived at $568,000. How did they get there? And so this is the different bullet points I just want you to focus on. The first one is like, you'll have to make some hard decisions, right? And so which core program and administrative expenses that needs to be cut? Also, we're dealing with cash now, so you have to remove all non-cash expense, your depreciation, your prepaids, all that's been paid for. There's no more cash going in and out with those lines, so take them out of the picture. And then add on any cash outlays, not expenses that you actually have to make in this period. And hopefully in an emergency situation, you're not going to be buying any big equipment, but maybe you have a contract already in place and you have to make that payment. You also have to make your debt payment. The banks will actually want their money. So you have to make sure you plan for that as well. And then another thing it would be good for you to take into consideration is liabilities. How much money do you have sitting in accounts payables, right? And also you've taken on revenue with conditions attached to them, your deferred revenue. You might have to repay some of those back if you realize you're going to cut that program. So having all these different things in mind help you come to that emergency budget. Next slide, Curt. And so another important aspect is time, right? So you can set the budget, but then how long, right? It'll take you to wind down, depending on what the goal is. How long will it take you to exit a community? Is it 3, 6, 12? And obviously time is so crucial because with the longer the time, the expenses will increase. So for this example, we've established it's going to be 12 months and they need $568,000 as a cash reserve. So then how do we get there? How do we set this goal? How do we build this cash reserve? The first thing you need to determine is your beginning balances, right? And this should include both unrestricted and available restricted cash. And then it also requires that you start planning for and budgeting for your operating annual budget at a surplus. And next slide, please. So in this slide, we're actually showing how do you calculate your available restricted cash. So the first step is looking at the restricted cash you have on hand from previous years, looking at restricted cash that you have on hand that came in this current fiscal year, and then subtracting from that amount restricted cash you cannot spend because it has conditions applied to it. It's actually conditioned for purpose that you cannot fulfill now, or for time that's maybe in the next future year. Taking that out, you're actually left with available restricted cash that you have available to spend. Okay, Curt, next slide. And so this is just a visual. Now you've determined your beginning balances. You've included the unrestricted and restricted cash. You have your reserve goal. We're going with the emergency reserve of $568,000. There's a shortfall of $85,800. So that's the goal. That's how we need to get to. Next slide, please. And how do we get there, right? And the first thing we have to budget for and manage towards a surplus. The only way we can actually build up a reserve is actually set goals where in our annual operating budget, our revenue exceeds our expenses, making you getting your surplus, and then making sure that goes towards your goal. And then this means setting a time frame. In this case, we have $85,800 as the shortfall. And so this organization has decided it's going to take us 5 years to get to that and to fill that gap and maintain at that level. And so we're talking about $13,000 each year for the annual budget. So you have to plan for that, right? And then it does include some hard choices. Another easy choice, hopefully you have a good donor that could actually just give that to you up front. If you run a campaign, who knows nowadays, and that could make it all easy for you. Next slide, please.
All right.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. Thank you, Shétu. So and we realize again, we're moving fairly quickly through a number of pressure points. And again, none of these are solutions to the problem. What they are is places that we hope is as you focus on them, you realize they are going to together give you some tools to address the kinds of pressures we know you're facing. So the next one is restricted revenue. And why we think that is actually a pressure point is the sense that it is a place we can find some relief. One of the things that we often, we for good reason complain about some of the restrictions we experience from some of the donors that we work with. There's been great movement among many progressive funders in philanthropy to provide more general operating support, which is exactly the kinds of things we need. But I also want to say that part of our struggle as nonprofits is that our donor restrictions are really of our own making. They have much to do with how we ask. The way that we ask, the kind of proposal budgets we give, the narratives we provide, those actually set the restriction, because the donors often just say, per your proposal or per your budget, here's some money. So we just want to make sure that we're being conscious of that, and that we're proactive in the way that we actually approach our ask. So I think restricted money is fantastic. I would like more of it for all of you. But I would also, hope that we could all sort of work towards the place where we are very savvy and sophisticated about how we ask for money, so that even if it comes in a restricted fashion, that we avoid a few things, like avoid line items, that we make sure we do include a few things like true program costs. We'll talk more about that. Jean mentioned that earlier in an article I wrote a long time ago now. But really, we're looking at the more that we present budgets, even in our program specific requests that are wide and all encompassing, even for just one program, they really function much more flexibly for us. So here's a quick tale of 3 budgets. And this is sort of my cautionary tale about the things that I hope that we move away from. And one of them is, going to a foundation and agreeing to restrict the money they give us to a particular line item. It's so tempting if we think this is what they want. I think we really do deserve and actually owe it to them to have a conversation that this might not be the best money for it as much as we would like it, because it doesn't actually pay for anything we're about to do. We can't only have a person working on something that doesn't get accomplished and all the supports that need to go around them. We can do a little better if we agree that, okay, for Foundation A, we want 25,000 and we're willing to show them a budget for just the 25,000. I always cringe at these a bit because it makes your work, it really diminishes what it takes to do your work. Their 25,000 is not accomplishing your whole program. I can almost guarantee that. And so the idea that we would give them a budget for only the amount of money we're giving us is another point I would like to encourage you to sort of stretch and flex and challenge back to some of your funders. Ideally, we get to something that's more like this, which is where you're asking for 25,000 from Foundation A, but you're asking them to be one of many in supporting your whole program. We'll say this is just a program of your organization. It could be your whole organization, at which point this becomes a general operating grant. But even if this is just one program, letting them know they're not alone and just communicating all it's going to take for this program to be run well. And we would thank them profusely for their part of it, but not to give them credit for more than they deserve. So that's the tale we're talking about. Because really, I'm wildly optimistic. I always say, ask for the whole world, get it all out there. And because I can tell you that if you restrict a grant to a whole program, that grant is going to function almost as if it's unrestricted, because you've now got money for something you're already doing, you're already planning, and you're getting money for that whole piece of your work. So the bigger the restriction, the better, if that makes sense. So this is actually a small part of what Jean mentioned. Thank you, Jean, for the shout out about this article. It's still out there on the Nonprofit Quarterly website, and also where it was originally written when I was working at Propel Nonprofits. But the first thing we want to do is to try not to think of core costs this way. We talk about administrative fundraising costs. You often see them represented this way as slices out of the pie, as if there's something bad and we should try to keep those very small, and then that means we have good programs. And I'll tell you that's actually false thinking, in the sense there's actually a great study out there that was done by North Carolina State University a number of years ago that actually proved, doing studies of Habitat for Humanity affiliates, that the lower the administrative percentage, the least efficient and the least sort of program worthy nonprofits were. It actually, that having a good solid base in the core supports really makes for a much stronger organization and much stronger program delivery. So instead, we started trying to advocate that we look at our core costs very differently. They're at the center of our organization, not a slice out of our important work. They're actually at the core of our important work and a piece that we found all the rest of our work on. So if we can start to ask for true program costs and include those core costs as not something we're ashamed of or trying to keep small or trying to say, oh, diminish we just include them very forthrightly as this is an important part of what we do. And a way to show that on sort of our more typical presentations is to look at sample proposal budgets. Here's a budget I would ask you never to submit if you can avoid it, which is this is a proposal for a certain project or a program at an organization, but it only includes the direct costs. So these are only things that in your accounting system you can attribute directly to this particular program. And so you see this budget comes to $80,600. Would we like that amount of money? Of course we would. We would always try to accept money to that, except for the fact that it leaves out very important costs. What about those core costs? What about an allocation of our shared administrative costs, our shared fundraising costs even? That's a little bit more bold to ask for fundraising costs, but we're a nonprofit. It is absolutely a core part of what we do. There's no pretending that we don't have to ask for money. It's part of the business model. So if we get to this point where we're willing to ask for the true costs of our programs, that's a great step forward. And I'll challenge you even more because it's sort of like if you can unbridle your mind a little bit, maybe you can start to see creative ways that you can work with various funders to ask for, to really provide them with better program budgets and proposal budgets that get you a different kind and more effective kind of restricted money. Because the next step would be to literally go to them and say, we actually need to exist into the future for our work today to be important. And thinking back to Shétu's presentation about trying to get to a cash reserve that makes sense, well, why don't we just go up front with them and tell them, look, we need to provision towards our operating reserve or an opportunity reserve. We don't have the funds on hand to be strong. You can fund us now, but we're afraid about that 6 years from now, we won't be able to keep this work going. I always tell you that any good idea that only lasts for 6 months isn't a good idea. It's not going to get enough done in the world. So if we can help them understand how to support us for the long haul, this would be a better way to go. And then, of course, I want to challenge you even farther because I can't stop when I get going. And that is, what if you actually put in your value to the community as part of what you ask for? It's intangible in some ways, but it's actually well, there are actually groups out there that are doing a lot of work on social economic benefits of some of the work we do. So you could probably at this point find folks to help you come in to put the dollar amount of the way that your community changing, community supporting, societally changing work actually affects things to the good. Why not just claim it, put it out front and see what happens? I mean, you may find some funders that scratch their heads a bit and go, wow, I've never thought of that, and come along with you. So I encourage you always to think big. So really, our lesson here, our message here is, fight inertia if you can do that. Don't just do things the way you've always done them. Believe that restricted money, don't sweat it so much as, be sophisticated about how you ask for it. Ask for everything you need, talk about deliverables, not expenses. That's always a different thing. What if you actually put a budget together that says, we're going to do these 10 things and we're going to $100,000 for it, instead of saying, I'm going to do $75,000 of salary and $20,000 of consultants and $5,000 of this and $5,000. What if we just said, no, I'm going to do these 10 events and I need $100,000. Okay, what if they said yes? Well, then, okay, great. You just go manage a budget and try to come in under the 100,000 and you put some towards your surplus. There are very creative ways you can think about these things. So little thought, our thoughts on the pressure point that is restricted revenue, and I hope that you can apply the right kind of pressure at the right place and get some results.
Okay, next pressure point number 3, accounting system design, the art of rows and columns. And here we're going to be talking about how you can actually use the art of rows and columns. We'll be talking about roll-ups as a tool to actually take away some of that pressure. We're looking right here, looking at this report here. I'm not going to lie, it gives me stress already. It adds to my stress because I need to go in and decipher what this is talking about. I need to make decisions. And so the goal here is we want something that's simple, Next slide, Kurt. We want something that's informative, and we want something that's sophisticated. We want simple financial reports, informative financial reports, and sophisticated financial reports. And so that's the goal. And so one way of getting there is matching your accounting to your mission. So looking at your rows and your columns, basically utilizing your rows to display resources and how you deploy them, and then utilizing the columns to display how you group your activities together. This really helps take away some of that pressure points. And thanks to Intuit QuickBooks, they've got very sophisticated now in allowing us to actually display these things by rows and columns. Next slide, Kurt. And so we're going to focus on rows. The first one will be the rows, and basically how accounts, how we can roll up revenue accounts, right? And so to the far left here, you see the long list of our different revenues, all categorized. We have contributed support, government grants, earned revenue, etc. And you see how that easily roll up into 4 lines, right? And for me, this is just, it takes out, it brings more clarity, right? I'm not saying we don't need to track all of the different lines in between, we do, but in terms of how you present it and the information you need, rolling up definitely can actually bring more clarity. Next slide, please. The same for expenses, and we know our expenses line can go on and on and on. And yeah, we can actually roll them up into just a few lines here that would really tell the story. The goal here is making sure you look at your reports and you can actually tell the story of what's actually happening. What are the different pressures the organization is feeling? Your financial report should be able to tell that story. Next screen. And so, as I said before, this is the picture of a rolled up rows, looking at, it's simple, it's informative, it's sophisticated, right? Looking at this, I can tell immediately what my highest revenue line is, my highest expense line, and that immediately, actually, as leaders in this field, you can start planning or strategizing, especially as we deal with what is around us now. How do we plan for maintaining this, reducing this, or applying the right pressure here that would actually make things better in these uncertain times? And definitely, as I said before, decluttering your chart of accounts, right? I would always say this, I know we want to track everything, but not every line is meant to be tracked. And I'm sure we know declutter, and then roll up. And that's the goal. Next slide, please.
Yeah, one quick thing here, I'll say this is only for the accountants among you who are panicking. He just talked about adding administrative and fundraising expense, and they're zeroed out here.
Oh,
I'll just say that, I'll say out loud for the accountants, that's because they were allocated out. They actually exist at this point up in the other line items under personnel because they're not different than their other expenses. But when we put them in the column that's administration, or the column, and Shétu will talk about those next, that's fundraising, at some point we allocate them out to all the programs. So when you put them all together, they zero out here because they're in their original natural line item up above. So that was a little accounting aside. Now I'll get back to the presentation.
Yeah, and someone did ask, so great, thanks for bringing that up. So the art of columns, how do you, and this is really where we need to look at, how do you define your work? And so the top, you can see, is how the organization talks about itself externally, their website, org charts, annual report, and then the bottom is pretty much internal, right? And looking at these different places or platforms can really give you a good understanding of what the organizations say about their work and how they document it. And most times it doesn't align, right? And the goal here is to make sure that what you're telling folks out there that you do and what you do align with what's in your accounting, your accounting and design, your rows and your columns, because then that just makes it so easy when you're actually designing or when you're giving your reporting. So the goal here is to make sure you align your programs with what you say, with the work that you do, right? Your reports externally and internally needs to say the same story. And I would also say, I've seen so many times, folks start with the intention, okay, I would say be consistent. You start with the intention of, our columns is actually for classes, and then or programs, and then you get a grant that actually funds different programming classes, and then you start tracking a grant on a column, right? And so it's just to be mindful and stay consistent, because that can also unravel a lot of troubles, right? And bring less clarity to your actual financial story. And so here, and this is what Curt was talking about before. You can see the administrative expense allocations, the 2 lines at the bottom. When you look at the total is 0, but this is just a very expanded view of your columns, right? And having too many columns is not a bad thing. The thing is, you need to figure out how you display them for the right audience. Not everybody needs to see all the information. And so in this visual here, you see we've actually collapsed the columns, and it's showing you your program and core support under program and operations, and then it's showing you a non-operating fund. This organization has a few bunch. Curt, can you just go 1 slide over quick? Sorry, no, 1 slide back. Sorry. And sorry, you can see this organization. They're tracking. They have non-operating funds. They have a fiscal sponsorship stuff they're dealing with, grant making. That is not their money to play with. Like, people giving them to pass that on. They have a campaign. It has nothing to do with their operations. So being able to collapse that and give it to the right people that need to see that is really important. And so this just reveals structure, that you're tracking different buckets of money, different bucket of expenses correctly. Next slide, please. And I love this slide. For me, this is your really typical slide that for a board, right? The board, I would say, it doesn't need to see every line item. Obviously, there's different reports for different people, right? And so condensed, you're trying to really focus attention to the audience so they can actually add value where it's needed. This is a fantastic report for a board. Maybe for a finance committee, they might want to see what's happening in your campaign, so you can actually expand the non-operating funds a bit more. But this gives you options to include or exclude columns based on the audience and basically the value they can add to the conversation.
Great, thanks, Shétu. So our 4th pressure point that we're going to talk about is a business model reality check, and we're going to look at it from both revenue and expense item, both actually from the row and the column way of looking at things. So we'll share some of the points that Shétu just shared with you. We'll use to then get at understanding your business model, and not to say things, but just to remind you that our business models are often quite complex, and we may not be as aware of them as we think, or we may be focusing on the wrong thing. So they're always worth spending a little time to uncover, and then with good tools, making sure they're visible to all those folks who need to, basically help with that, meaning our program leaders, our organizational leaders, our board and finance committee. But really, a good accounting system and getting it set up and learning this art of rows and columns is going to help us with business model analysis. One that we'll spend a little time today is like, what are the strengths in our fundraising, and then what do we do about that, and where do we want to invest more? There's no easy answer to needing more revenue, especially if one of our revenue streams is unstable at the moment. And then where do we deploy our resources the most, and how does that define us? And to Shetu's point earlier, do we have the right places, the right buckets, if you want to call them that? Because I'm going to call them that in just a second, where the resources and funds that we're putting out are actually accomplishing what we want them. So we're going to try to illuminate a business model a bit by row by row. What does that mean? So our rows are line items. So knowing how resources flow in and out of the organization, we always like to do this test with folks. We just say, what if you literally deleted every line of your financial report except for your largest 3 revenue line items and your largest 3 expense line items? One, you would be surprised that you may still have 85% of your budget there, and you're almost like, why am I fussing so much about the other 15% with like 45 line items to describe it when it's actually not that influential, right? So for example, if we take the example, even at the level that Shétu was showing you earlier, if we look at that same statement of activities and look at the support and revenue, the income side of things, we see that there are 3 large line items that, in this case, make up, I think, more than 70, 75, maybe more than 75% of the budget. So those are the very influential line items. And the release from restriction line item, if that's not familiar with you, that's actually foundation contributions, could be sometimes government grants that come in the form of a grant, not a contract, that have a restriction on them either by time or purpose and then get released. So we sort of in some ways would see foundation contributions and the release from restriction here in the same category, which then points you to that this organization, maybe 70% of their budget is, and their business model is one thing they do well, which is raise, well, we hope they do it well, is raise foundation funds. And then the other, next largest category they have is sponsorship revenue. So another area where they're successful or have at least put a lot of resources. We'll come back to that, and it's important in a second. On the expense side, this is actually a very common situation. Personnel is often the highest expense for most nonprofits, partly because many of us, not all, but many of us, the work we do in the world is really literally done by amazing human beings who bring their time, talents, creativity to some problem or solution that we are trying to deal with in the world. So personnel is not surprisingly, it's often the largest line item. But then here you see contracted services, which is actually also other people doing good work, just not the ones that we have on our staff. And then in this organization's case, they're doing direct community assistance. So they have those. So this gives you a lot of information about how they affect their mission in the work, how they actually get this work done in the world. So also a great insight into their business model. So I'm going to focus a little bit on the revenue side for business models, just for sake of time. But one of the things that revenue will tell you is what are your fundraising strengths, right? So the organization we just saw was foundation grants seem to be the place, at least it's the place where they've concentrated. Now, it doesn't mean that's a bad thing. It just means that's information. Try not to judge first. Try to get assess really the truth of the matter. But it could be individual donors, major donors, government grants. You might have all of these, only one of these. But just understanding your business model comes down to which of these is where you have focused your fundraising energy. Now, there's what we would I call it the diversification conundrum, because there's many people who say, oh, well, we only have a couple of really strong, revenues. We have to diversify. You'll hear that. As soon as a board member says that, I'm like, maybe not, right? And I'll give a shout out to Nonprofit Quarterly. Now seems like the ancient past, but I think it's an article from way back in 2012, talks about that very thing. It's actually, I think it was something like From Small to Scale or something like, might have been a subtitle, but basically saying that most organizations that were growing quickly actually were really expert in one kind of fundraising. And they just all in that kind of fundraising, and they grew quickly. And strength, their diversity came underneath. They didn't have just one giant funder. They might have had 50 foundation grantors, and so foundation grants was their strength, and they just got a lot of diversity underneath it. But it might be 4 or more streams. You might have only 2. You might have really be heavily focused on one stream. Just come to know your own business model. And then understand the truth about, if you're going to have any new revenue streams, that every time you decide you're going after some new stream, ask yourself some very important questions first. Who's going to do the work? Do you actually have anybody on staff right now that has any expertise in that? Or are you just going to throw somebody at it and say, oh, well, we got now so-and-so's working on it. And like so-and-so's going like, I've never done this before. So you got to know you have the expertise. And then do you actually have the infrastructure, and are you willing to invest in that infrastructure to make it successful? You can't just wish at more money. You literally have to plan for, build around it, and then go execute a plan to get more money. All right, so now a couple of things that's the row version, the quick, we're passing through these fairly quickly. But there's also business models within your business models. And back to Shétu's good work about columns, let's think of your business model as also buckets of resources. And so every bucket is going to be a column, right? So whose money is it? Like, who gave you the money? Like Shétu is literally showing you whose money is it. Fiscal sponsorship money is not ours. Make sure we don't start looking at that like we're going to spend it. How can it be used? How does it behave? Is it like, when does it come in? When can we spend it? And you have all these different kinds of examples of how your columns or your buckets might be laid out. Well, once you know that, this is that same, slide that Shétu showed earlier, but a properly designed columns are going to reveal your business model in a way that's actually useful to you. So I would say that everything in the blue is where you live. If colors are available to you, that's the slides from program activities through core supports. that those columns, those first two sets of three from left to right, those are the columns that show where you're actually doing your basic program work. The others are money you have to tend to, but it's actually not your core business model. So once we know that, and you have columns that really meaningfully set out the different groupings, then what we're aiming at is clearly segregating out the program and operations piece from the other funds, so you know that that's where you're concentrating, because that's where you're paying your staff for the most part that are doing your core work. So as Shétu said earlier, she was showing you a version. We just weren't talking at that point about the pressure point of business model, but she was showing your business model there, where you have the column that's program and operations, which is your core activities. And then you have in this case, this organization has non-operating funds. And all we're asking is that you help everyone, especially at the board, leadership, and program level, understand their piece in this so that they understand, what money is actually available to spend. That is the key piece of having a good handle on your own business model, is what do we really have to spend. So Shétu, we are to our
final pressure point, a functioning finance team, how to build a strong finance team. And I'm sure this is something that's on everybody's mind. We all have dealt with this before. Next slide, Curt. And what makes up the finance function? And I'm sure we're all aware these are all the different buckets of work. We like the word buckets here, so you just have to excuse us. The different buckets of work that needs to be done. And I'm sure you know the long task list under each of these items. And the list can be very extensive, but the goal here is to make sure you have a team that can really help you take away some of the pressure points, to help you relieve some of the pressures that we talked about earlier. So how do you assemble a team together, right? And who's available for the role, right? What level of staffing is your organization willing to commit to and can afford to commit to, right? Curt, you do want to talk about that?
Well, and that's the thing. We're going to ask folks to have a strategy. So we have all these roles and needs in finance, but who, again, we always think we throw people at jobs or tasks and we don't even know if they have any skill there or if they want to do that work. And so we really want you to be conscious of this idea that there are many roles to fill, right? And then we're going to talk probably a little bit more on this next slide about how, a strategy for fulfilling them is what we're asking for, but we will help you realize that there is quite a different, a real array of things that we could choose. Now, Shétu and I have both been CFOs, where we were the CFO of an organization. And Shétu, I won't speak to you, but I'll share my experience that I've had the position where I was the sole, like I was a one-person department. And then later on, the big change was that I actually got to have half time of the executive assistant, which that became, so it's like I've been in that stage. I've also been the leader of a team of 5 people in a finance department, right? So there's different ways that this can get done. Shétu, I don't know about your own experience in various ways.
Oh, definitely. I have been a sole person as well. And we all know how that can lead to real burnout. But then some people can just do it. They know how to get it done. But I think that the challenge, the question here you should be asking is, yeah, some folks say they know how to do it from the beginning, from the operational side to the strategy. You might have a one-person team that can carry all of that, and that's what you can afford at the moment. But then there might be some places where you need more strategic, help, and there might be places where you need to actually use some of your actually non-finance or accounting staff to actually help. For the one-person team, I say that pose some internal control challenges that you might have to deal with because it's one person dealing with everything. But this is where, and I have seen with my experience, a mix of all of these things together based on an organization's budget and based on what they need. You can definitely I've seen having a fractional CFO or fractional accounting person. You have somebody in-house. You using non-accounting staff who is well aware of what's going on to help with your internal controls. I've seen folks being very creative around this because at the end of the day, you're looking for skill, you're looking for experience, expertise. At the same time, you're looking at what you can afford, which is the reality. But then you want the goal is to bring a team together that can really help you deal with any financial pressures you're going through, right? And not just having to bring out the fire hose when everything goes bad, right? Kurt, do you want to add to that? Yeah.
Well, just that I'd share a little bit of our experience at Diverge Finance Cooperative. That Shétu and I founded the organization actually 5 years ago. We didn't actually intend to be what we are today. We came together thinking we were going to go into the world and provide collective CFO sort of servicing or functioning for various organizations that needed things at that level. And what happened to us is that the first organizations we got into, we immediately found out that the underlying accounting, I mean, maybe saying it was in disarray is a little strong, but it was challenging. And so we ended up, very quickly changing how our organization looks. And today there are 12 of us, and at all levels, we have CFOs, we have controllers, we have accounting managers, we have accountants, and we're trying to be, as we're obviously one of the solutions here. We would probably fall in that third one, the outsourced fractional model, but we know we're not the right solution for everybody. But we ended up needing to do that because that seemed to be the need, where folks had different things they were trying to solve for. And we found we couldn't be very effective CFOs without having really good accounting underlying it. So that's where we sort of went with this. But we're really just putting this in front of you, that having a good, strong finance function is going to be a pressure point where you can have some leverage and be able to apply the right pressure if you can. But there just has to be a commitment to it on your organization's part. Like anything, it doesn't come without good thought and then probably an investment of those good hard-earned resources to make sure it happens. So,
and we will advocate for those resources any day. Like, I think it's really good investment to make sure your finance infrastructure, because this is like, it's the core, right? Of it has to tell the story of how things are going. And you need that information every day, as often as possible, to be able to make good decisions. So here we are at the end of our PowerPoint. I think we did it in time.
Making it.
Exactly, just making it, right? And these are the different facts. And we hope from today's presentation, we've actually shared stuff with you that can help clarify, bring clarity around your cash, help you with ways how you can be creative about restricted revenue, knowing what you ask for, aligning your reporting with your program and program and your mission, your business, being more aware of your business model, and assembling the right team. And I hope this has been very helpful. We'll share the slides, and definitely Curt and I will be more than happy if you have any questions to reach out to us. We're here to actually provide support. Okay. Thank you.
Brilliant. Brilliant. And we have a couple of questions that I'm going to ask if you will reply to in writing when we send out the PDF around some of the specifics of weighting in the cash flow reserve analysis, and also some issues around how do we maintain internal controls with a one-person finance team. But I think we can respond to those in writing. Thank you both so very much. And I want to welcome Priya and Roy from Intuit QuickBooks. Welcome. This is so practical. We're going to go right into a demo really focused on bill pay specifically, right, Priyan? And I know from our finance work here at MPQ in different webinars that optimization of QuickBooks is one of those gaps that Shétu and Curt are talking about. How do we use the tool even smarter? So really happy to hand it over to you and walk us through this piece of it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeannie. A very welcome. So actually, like, a very good afternoon to everyone over here. My name is Priyanjali. I am a staff product marketing manager at Intuit QuickBooks, and I am so excited to give you a very practical hands-on demo of QuickBooks Bill Pay. Now, I did hear in Curtis and Shétu's talk that they were talking about the unique challenges that specifically nonprofits face. And that isn't just generic, like across the business, but even when it comes to accounts payable, nonprofits face this very unique challenge. The one-man staff, like very limited staff, that is a challenge. Having very strict oversight and donor accountability. Y'all face this every day. Now, I do want to talk to you a little bit about QuickBooks Bill Pay, which is actually designed to help you pay your vendors faster with the full control and audit trail that you require, without leaving QuickBooks. Now, I think like having one less login, one less place to maintain, that is extremely helpful for a person who is extremely overburdened with so many things to take care of. So that's what I'm going to be going through today. QuickBooks Bill Pay is your accounts payable hub in QuickBooks Online. So you get the full visibility, control of everything accounts payable through this tool. And QuickBooks Online is something where there are many of y'all that are using it on a regular basis. So it is not needing to learn a new surface. It is in the same QuickBooks you're living and breathing in. So I am going to today cover three key areas. The first is, you have a ton of vendor invoices. Let's look at how to use AI to record them in seconds. The second is scheduling payments without leaving QuickBooks, no opening up your bank, no writing a check. And the third is, and I know this is the most important for a lot of y'all, is how to set up workflows and approval workflows to ensure oversight and accountability. If you have any questions, please keep dropping them in the chat. But let's start with how to record bills using AI. Now, Intuit provides you with a dedicated email where all you need to do is forward all vendor invoices to that dedicated email. You can share that email out with your vendors so that they can CC it, and you do not even need to forward. So you can either forward invoices or you can drag and drop multiple bills that you have into QuickBooks, and then you can see the AI working its magic. So it reads everything and it creates pre-filled bills with all the information ready for you to review. Now, what does it mean? When you click into one of those pre-filled bills, you see the image of the PDF, which you've just forwarded to QuickBooks on the left, and on the right-hand side, all the information. QuickBooks has read it and entered it in. That includes all the line item details. Now you can set it up with as much or as less information you need. And the basic idea is, yes, use AI to fill it up, but you still have the control. If you want to change anything, you can do that. When you have vendors and you do not have their payment information, with one simple click, you can invite them to provide their own payment information into a secure portal. There is no exchanging bank information over email or phone. The vendor fills it up themselves. So, and once you get done, all you need to do is save, and that's it. The bills are recorded in QuickBooks. So once you've recorded a bill, let's look at how you can pay vendors without leaving QuickBooks. So you have your unpaid bills in QuickBooks. This is everything that you've reviewed and you've saved it in as like, okay, this makes sense. Let's go pay it. You can select multiple bills and all you need to do is set up your payment. Now, here's what's very interesting. What I understand is with nonprofits, you have different grants and different bank accounts for each grant. So you can actually you can have multiple bank accounts and select which bills get paid from which grant account. That gives you the flexibility of not having to switch between bank accounts in your bank. This is that one place where you can do everything. You can even combine you get multiple bills from the same vendor. You can send it out as one payment. You can also send out either an ACH or a paper check to your vendor. So a ton of customization. Every sort of vendor that you have, you can use this tool to pay them. You do not need to have a separate process. Everything is in one place. Fill up all the information, select how you pay them, when you pay them, and that's pretty much it. You review and that's it. Like it's just a few clicks and it sets it up. Now, it's important also to inform your vendors what bills have been paid. So QuickBooks sends out a remittance advice email to your vendors, which has all the information of what's the scheduled date, what are the how many invoices, what is the amount of the invoices, everything is included in that. And then if you have sent out a check, when the vendor deposits the check, you can also view a copy of the cleared check, so that this is additionally like closing the loop on the tracking. So everything has gone out and you have a confirmation on the payment. So we covered how to record bills, how to pay bills. Let's finally look at the oversight layer, which is approval workflows. Approval workflows, like the way I like to think about it is you're just specifying, like the first you start off by specifying, when does this bill need to be approved? Maybe all bills do not need to be approved. And so you almost define when the bill needs to be approved. Now you can customize workflows there are many fields by which you can customize. So you can customize it by class, product, project, location, anything and everything. So there's a ton of customizations you can do. Once you define which bill needs to get approved, then you define like who approves them. So you can have like one person, or I know that, there are sometimes different, if there are multiple people in the organization, you want to specify bills from a particular vendor go to, Gene for approval, and bills from another vendor go to Shétu. And so you can customize who approves. You can also set up an approval group where either Gene or Shétu, one of them goes and approves, so that you ensure somebody gets their eyes on it. And if Gene is on vacation, she doesn't need to log into QuickBooks to approve. Shétu can approve it. So you can set up approval groups. You can really customize it as is the need for your organization. So you can make it as less or as deep of a workflow. And once you've done defining this, all you need to do is save it and turn it on. You can define multiple rules in this, and then all you do is save and turn it on. And that's it. The bill approval workflow is set up. It's great to have a defined way which helps you ensure that no bill gets paid without an approval. So that's what this has done. However, we have heard specifically from nonprofits, there are very stringent rules about who needs to sign off before the payment goes out, which is why there are a ton of nonprofits where I've heard like you print out checks, you send it to one person, and sometimes it requires two signatures. So two board members need to sign, and it is a mess. So you can actually automate that in QuickBooks as well, through setting up payment release approval workflows. So the first one was on a bill, how you can set up approvals to ensure the bill is approved. And this is related to your money movement. So think of it as the sign on a check. So similar to the bill approval, you can customize it by chart of accounts, by bank accounts, etc. So you select when, you select the who needs to approve, and same, you can have two signatories out here. And let me quickly show you what this means in action. So you've recorded the bill and then you want to save it, but the bill approval workflow is turned on. So you can't just save it. It has to get submitted for approval. Great. You submit it for approval. Now the reviewer can review and they can approve, but they can also leave comments, they can decline. All of that is possible. And only bills that are approved can be paid. So that is when you turn this on, you cannot pay bills which have not been approved. So, and then we set up approvals for the money movement as well. So when you set up the entire payment, you cannot just click pay. You have to have an approval before the money actually leaves the bank account. And so once you click submit, and you can have this as whoever is the approving authority, they get notified. So they get a notification, they can click review what are the payments that are going out, they can approve it. And once they approve, only then the money actually leaves the bank account. And that's pretty much it. Now you had a quick peek into how you can use QuickBooks Bill Pay to automate your accounts payable while maintaining all the controls, the audit trails, everything that you need. Something I just want to call out is every action that you've done in QuickBooks, so the every approval, every payment, that is all there is an audit trail, and it's all being recorded in QuickBooks, and your accountant, everybody has access. So tax time becomes there's one less thing to worry about. All right. Thank you so much, Jeannie. And
Oh my
thank you.
goodness, that was so brilliant. And wow, I did not realize that we were there with AI entering our bills for us. Fascinating. And there are a couple of questions, technical questions about how allocation happens in this context, et cetera, that I'll pose to you. And like with Curt and Shétu's handful of questions, we'll just put them in writing back to all attendees early next week, if that's okay. Terrific. Shétu and Curt, I also want to thank you for that, rapid fire, but very deep and powerful presentation. And Priyan, thank you so much for Intuit QuickBooks sponsorship of this whole event, which I think has just been content rich, and for your own presentation showing us how to optimize bill pay in Intuit QuickBooks. So thank you very much. Thank you all for being here. We'll send the follow-up recording and resources early next week. Thank you.